Imagine a 92-year-old war hero, once a fierce soldier on the front lines, now facing a very different kind of battle. She's been living a peaceful life for years, but when a group of rowdy bikers begins harassing her outside her home, her calm world starts to crumble. The bikers seem to think they can intimidate her with their loud engines and reckless behavior, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. When the situation escalates, this fearless senior takes matters into her own hands. With a steady hand and an unshakable resolve, she reaches for her phone, and what happens next will leave you speechless. What could this 92-year-old woman do to stop the chaos? You won't believe the phone call she makes, and how it turns the tables in a way no one saw coming. Stay tuned to find out. The woman's name is Eleanor, a decorated war veteran who served in World War II. She spent the last few decades quietly in her small town, a place where everyone knows her as the kind-hearted widow with a fascinating past. But lately, her once peaceful street has been overrun by loud motorcycles, rumbling engines echoing through the neighborhood at all hours. The bikers, a notorious group known for causing trouble wherever they go, have started hanging out near her home. At first, it was just a few late-night revs, but soon it became harassment. They'd park outside her house, blocking her driveway, shouting loudly, and even intimidating her neighbors. Eleanor tried everything to keep the peace, but they weren't afraid of her polite requests or even the police. The situation was getting worse, and she was running out of options. That's when she picked up the phone. But who could she possibly call to stop them? Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she dialed the number. She had never felt so desperate, yet she knew deep down that this was her only choice. For most of her life, she had relied on her strength, her experience, and her calm demeanor to handle any situation. But this was different. The bikers had crossed a line that even her patience couldn't stretch. She glanced at the framed photograph of her late husband, the man who had been her rock through many battles. He was always the one to step in when things got rough, but now it was just her, and she refused to back down. Across town, the bikers had no idea what was coming. To them, Eleanor was just another old lady they could push around. They had already been causing trouble at local businesses and harassing other residents, but no one had stood up to them in a way that truly mattered. Some of the neighbors had called the cops, but the bikers always scattered before any authority could arrive. But this time, Eleanor wasn't calling the police. She wasn't calling anyone from town, either. She had contacted someone from her past, someone who knew how to deal with situations like this, and someone who owed her a favor. The tension in the air grew thicker as Eleanor waited, wondering if her decision would be enough to finally put an end to the nightmare. The bikers, unaware of the storm that was coming, roared down the street once again, revving their engines and laughing as they did. Little did they know, this was the last time they'd feel so untouchable. The minutes stretched on like hours as Eleanor sat, the phone still pressed to her ear. She heard only silence on the other end, followed by the occasional distant roar of the bikes. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew the person she had called was no ordinary figure. This was someone from her military days, a man who had fought alongside her in the most dangerous corners of the world. A man with connections, resources, and a reputation that commanded respect. He had promised to come if she ever needed help, and now was that time. But would he? Or had too much time passed since their last contact? The thought gnawed at her. Outside, the bikers had gathered in their usual spot. This time, they seemed more riled up than ever, their loud engines a reminder of their unchecked power over the neighborhood. Eleanor could hear their laughter and crude shouts. They had noticed her window blinds twitch, and one of them, a man with tattoos creeping up his neck, locked eyes with her from the street. There was a look in his eyes, something darker than just mischief. He was coming closer. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone, and her mind raced. What if this didn't work? What if the bikers were too far gone, too wild to be stopped? But just as her doubt began to consume her, a voice came through the line. It was low and calm, exactly what she needed to hear. "I'm on my way, Eleanor. Stay safe. Help's coming." The relief was instant, but short-lived. She heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching her front door, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. This was it. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same after today. The doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the tension like a knife. Eleanor froze, her heart racing. She didn't expect them to be this bold. The bikers had never come to her front door before. They preferred to play their games from a distance, taunting her from the street. But this time, they were directly on her doorstep. The same man with tattoos now stood in her doorway, his eyes cold and calculating. Guess who finally decided to answer? He sneered, his voice thick with mockery. He wasn't just here for trouble anymore. He was daring her to fight back, as if he could see the fear in her eyes, and wanted to push it further. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. She had already made her call. She just had to wait, stay calm, and trust that help was on the way. But then a second figure emerged from the shadow of the porch. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the new arrival, someone she had never expected to see. It was Jimmy, the very man who had caused her the most pain all those years ago. He wasn't supposed to be here. Jimmy had been a troubled soul back in her military days, someone who had once betrayed her and left her to carry the weight of a dangerous mission alone. Yet here he was, grinning like an old friend, stepping out from behind the biker gang as if he owned the place. "Long time, no see, Eleanor," he said, his grin widening as he crossed the threshold without invitation. Eleanor's world spun. Not only were the bikers escalating their harassment, but the one person she never expected to show up, someone who knew all her vulnerabilities, was now standing in front of her. Her mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Why was he here? Was he part of this group now? And what did this mean for the plan she had set in motion? The sound of a motorcycle revved in the distance, but it wasn't the usual group of bikers. It was something different, something closer, faster. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone again. She knew the clock was ticking, but now, with Jimmy in the mix, everything had just become more complicated. Would help really arrive in time? Eleanor's heart pounded as she stood face to face with Jimmy. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, and the bikers behind him were growing impatient, circling her yard like vultures. Jimmy's grin only deepened, but Eleanor's mind was already working, calculating her next move. She couldn't let him control this situation again. Not after everything he had put her through. Just then, a loud engine roared down the street, and the sound sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just any motorcycle, it was the one she had been waiting for. She knew who it was, even before the sleek black bike screeched to a halt at the curb. The rider dismounted, tall and imposing, with a helmet that obscured his face. Jimmy's eyes narrowed as he stepped back slightly, recognizing the figure. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. The rider removed his helmet, revealing a familiar face, one Eleanor hadn't seen in over 40 years. It was Lieutenant Harris, her old commanding officer, the man who had promised to be there if she ever needed help. And here he was, standing between her and the chaos that threatened to engulf her world. "Everything all right here, Eleanor?" Harris asked, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. The bikers instantly stiffened, a sense of unease rippling through their ranks. Harris wasn't just any old veteran. He was someone with connections that ran deep. The kind of connections that made people like Jimmy and his gang rethink their next move. Before anyone could respond, Harris turned to the bikers, his gaze sharp. "You might want to reconsider your choices, gentlemen. I'm not here to negotiate." The bikers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. They knew who Harris was, and they knew better than to push him. But Jimmy wasn't about to back down so easily. He squared up to him. The bikers, seeing their leader abandon them, quickly followed suit. They scattered, vanishing into the night as if they had never been there. The police arrived moments later, but by then the scene was already clear. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind still trying to process everything that had just happened. Harris turned to her, his voice soft. "You okay?" Eleanor nodded, still in shock. She had never expected things to turn out like this. But then, as she looked down at her phone, the final twist came. There in the messages was a text from someone she hadn't heard from in years. It was simple. "Don't trust Harris. He's not who you think he is." Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of those words settled in. Everything she had just experienced, the help she thought she had received, was it all part of a bigger plan? The real question lingered. Who could she trust now? Eleanor stared at the text for what felt like an eternity, her heart sinking. The name at the top of the message was unmistakable. It was from her late husband's best friend, someone she had trusted completely. The realization hit hard. Harris had been playing both sides. But before she could process it further, the sound of a police officer's voice interrupted her thoughts. The bikers were gone, the threat had passed, but now Eleanor's world had shifted once again. As the officers took statements, Eleanor turned to the horizon, the weight of the night sinking in. She had come so close to losing everything, and yet somehow she had held on. When the dust finally settled, she found herself standing alone in the quiet street, no longer a helpless victim, but a survivor. In the end, Eleanor realized the true power wasn't in the people who had come to her aid. It was in her own ability to stand firm, even in the darkest moments. The real hero of this story wasn't just the war veteran. It was the woman who had never stopped fighting.